Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I- I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight, and it's going to be we're going to do a presentation. Well, Brandon Parker's going to do a presentation for us, and if you don't mind, can you just please introduce yourself in the chat so that we can have more time for this presentation? Brandon, you're on.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join in on this interesting discussion about Westwind elements. My name is Brandon Parker. I am born and raised at Lawton, Oklahoma. I'm Comanche. I'm a descendant of the Quijada band of Comanches, or even back home, some of y'all may have heard of someone known as Quanah Parker. I'm just 4 generations away from him. I was born and raised on an original allotment land back in the southeast corner of the reservation, and I essentially grew up, got concerned about the health and safety of my community, and went to college and learned about that. And I've been working as a professional in this field ever since I can remember, to maybe around my mid-20s. But thanks to all the tribal nations who are joining us today. I certainly appreciate it, from all 4 directions, north, south, east, west. Thank you for taking the time to be with us here this evening. Also, real quick shout out to the Westwind Resistance team. There's a few on the call. I appreciate y'all setting this up. Everybody's worked really hard, and so I'd like to go ahead and get this presentation started. Real quickly, though, you can see on the bottom of the screen, I have the word nickel, cobalt, and other minerals, refinery, and Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache Homelands. The reason why I put other minerals in quotation is because there's several contracts and term agreements and documents, and they use that term other minerals. And so although Westwind is telling you they're coming to do nickel and cobalt, their language, the legal language, is opening the door for many other things that we don't even know about right now. So let's go ahead and get started. So real quick disclosure statement: the opinions and views expressed here. Excuse me, can somebody get a hot mic? Thank you. Basically, a quick disclosure statement: the views expressed here are solely my own and don't reflect the views of my employer. Quickly, some objectives for today. I just want to explain to everybody, I have only 2 objectives. They're very simple. First one is basically to convey everybody that Westwind Resistance does not support Westwind Elements Incorporated constructing and operating a pilot plant or a large-scale refinery in the Kiowa Homelands. My second objective is to educate you all on why. So who is Westwind Resistance? We'll go ahead and start this. Just to give you a general overview, this presentation will be basically about an introduction into Westwind Elements, the leadership behind them, how they formed, going back to 2002, how Westwind Elements landed in Comanche country. It primarily hit the city of Lawton, and then that happened around February 2023, supposedly, publicly at least. And so they've been trying to set up and establish shop ever since, and they're really working hard to do that. The public is really behind the curve. We just recently essentially found out about a lot of the information just a couple of months ago. So who is Westwind Elements, and when was Westwind Elements created? I have right here, if you go to a website called opencorporates.com, you can search and see about LLCs that are created and corporations that are created. And this is the first that Westwind Elements appears on the record. Here you can see in March 29th, 2022, Kaylee Long, an individual named Kaylee Long, registers a company called Western Enterprises, LLC. But just a few days later, literally 2 days later, the same individual, Kaylee Long, out of Oklahoma, registers a company called Western Properties, LLC. And then a couple of months later, in June, on June 15th, 2022, we have a company called Harvard Business Services. That's basically a company in Delaware. They help individuals who want to help create an LLC. You can Google Harvard Business Services. But again, we have on June 15th, 2022, Westwind Elements Inc. And then a couple days later, there's another organization called Westwind DRC Foundation. We believe DRC stands for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Again, Harvard Business Services Incorporated creates this business in Delaware. And then just a few months later, we have something called CVMR Westwind Incorporated. Again, this time, it goes back to Delaware, but this time somebody used a company called Corporate Services Company to help create this incorporation. And then lastly, what we were able to uncover is in April 2023, Westman Element Inc. was created. And essentially, this is what we believe to be an active sub-branch in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Again, it's kind of tricky, but if you go back to the Westman Elements Inc. that was created on June 15th, we believe that it's these two organizations that are currently operating right now. So in a weird way, it's kind of confusing. There's just a lot happening in around the span of 12 months. And who did really all this stuff? This individual right here. This is Kaylee Long. She is, from what I understand, she's not born in Oklahoma, but she spent most of her life in Oklahoma. She has strong roots in the Bartersville, Oklahoma area. She's college educated. She has, you can really take Kaylee Long, you can Google her name. You get a lot of news stories and a lot of information about her political affiliations, her political background. I believe she does have a master's degree. It's not necessarily based in science. It's based in like political science to some degree, I believe. But this is Kaylee Long. She is the current CEO of Westwind Elements. And so when Westwind Elements registered that LLC back in June 15, 2022, it's believed that somewhere in 2022, we suspect the documents that we've been able to find go back to October, but I really believe that Kaylee somehow got connected with an individual named Kamran Kazon. He's the CEO for a company called CVMR. CVMR is Kaylee Long's first technical partner. And it's not quite conclusive as to what led Kaylee Long to CVMR, but also around 2022, the U.S. government was enacting a number of different laws. There's a number of different memos coming from various federal agencies, really trying to. President Biden initiates executive orders, really trying to basically open up the pipeline and promote domestic metal refining in the U.S. And I think somewhere in that process, Kaylee Long learned about this initiative. She learned about the incentives that go behind it. And somehow she, again, she's a political insider, so she used her connections to create proposals. And one of those proposals went to obviously Kamran Kazan out of Toronto, Canada. And anyhow, they formed a partnership. There's documents that show that, federal documents that show that they have a partnership. It's interesting. CVMR also has an investment interest into Westwind Elements. I've seen elected officials from the Comanche County area say that CVMR has up to a 35% investment. And I've also seen documents that CVMR appears to have a 20% investment. So I'm not really quite clear exactly how much, but what is clear is that there is an investment between the two. This is a little bit about CVMR. And I know some of y'all have heard of something called a pilot plant. This is a actual pilot plant that CVMR has on display in Toronto. And this isn't exactly what Westwind's trying to build. This equipment here is supposedly proprietary equipment. It's patented technology. But this is a nickel carbonyl refinery in Toronto. And I personally believe that the CEO of Westwind Elements actually probably toured this pilot site. Why do I believe that? Because there's a blog if you go to the internet, if you go to Americans for Intelligence Reform, there's a blog dated 10/23/2022. And it talks about how the CEO of Westwind flew to Lawton, Oklahoma. They were briefed in Lawton. Not exactly, again, this blog is dated 10/23, but I don't know exactly when they flew to Lawton, Oklahoma. But Miss Long flew there, and I don't know what kind of business happened while they were in Lawton. But what's quite clear is James Akers was on board on that plane. Kaylee was on that plane. I'm not sure. I suspect there were more individuals, but they flew all the way to Toronto, Canada. And when they got to Toronto, Canada, they conducted formal business. They had dinner, and lawyers were there, and there were lead scientists there. And I think that this may have been one of the earliest firsthand visits where the two individuals of the CEO of both agencies met each other in person. And I think they established confidence in each other's business trust. And that's when they, I suspect that's when they joined a formal, strong bond to really go in on this and talk about, millions of dollars in investing to build a refinery. And they already singled out Lawton, Oklahoma. So here we have, let's go back to August. This is a little bit before October. Let's go back to August 23rd, 2022. Where does the city of Lawton come in? And where does this actually start politically? In August 2022, none of this is on the Comanche Nation's radar. None of this is on the KCA radar. None of this is on the citizens of Comanche County or the citizens of Lawton, Oklahoma's radar. Why? The city council held a meeting. Here it is right here. This is dated August 23rd, 2022. And at this meeting, they essentially started using the term the Blue Brave Heart Project. I'm not sure what really Blue Brave Heart means, but obviously, in order for this to hit the agenda, CVMR and Westwind Elements, somebody had to be in discussion. Kaylee had to be in discussion with Lawton officials prior to August 23rd, 2022. I don't know how long. Somewhere, maybe in the summer, maybe in the late spring. No one really knows exactly, except for those individuals within the city government. But at some point around August 23rd, the elected officials became highly confident, and they believed in what Westwind was telling them. Westwind apparently asked for confidentiality, and because of that ask, the city used the title, the Blue Braveheart Project. Here's another a document you can clearly see right here. Warren seconded, and there was a motion. This all happened in executive session. This was all behind closed doors. This didn't happen in an open session. You can actually go back to August 23rd, 2022, and you can find video of them breaking for executive session. But here you can see they approved the basic terms for Blue Braveheart Project, giving them a forgivable loan of $10 million. They're saying that 2,335 jobs are coming, and Blue Braveheart has obtained $126 million in development financing, supposedly. Again, this is August 2022. And then I've got this document. I can't remember how long this document is, but the city creates this, what they call this Blue Braveheart Incentive Document. It's an information abstract. This is a few months later. This is dated 11/22/2022. Again, if you're an innocent citizen, and if you see the Blue Braveheart Incentive, you have really no idea what this is. You don't know it's a refinery. You don't know it's Westwind Elements. You don't know their connection to wherever. You don't know that this is an industry that's never really existed in the United States. It's just interesting that all you know is that, and that's if you're tied into this. I mean, there's a lot of documents when you're looking at city governments, and not your average citizen doesn't have the time to comb through all these city documents. So anyhow, this Blue Braveheart Incentive Document basically talks about how is the city going to come up with the money to provide the incentives to bring Westwind in. There's no contract in place at this point in time. There's no resolution in place at this point in time, except for support and motions to support the Blue Braveheart project or incentive. What's also interesting is while Westwind is asking for anonymity and the city of Lawton is giving them anonymity, on the exact same day that that executive session agreement happened on August 23rd, 2022, there's an individual who identifies himself as Caleb Blair. He goes on social media. I'm not exactly sure if this is Facebook or somewhere, but he goes on social media, and this is when he's basically trying to recruit investors. He's saying that Westwind just opened up a Series A raise portal. Some of y'all may be familiar with. I'm not a financial guy. I know a little bit. I've done a little bit of research, but this is when they open up Series A funding and they're going after investors. But it's interesting that they're claiming to be, and they already released and identify themselves as Westwind Elements. And then let's fast forward to February 23rd, 2023. I want to actually let everybody hear this video from the city council.
The reason we do economic development is to grow. And if we're not growing, we know what happens to our home and property values. They decline. Anybody else? Okay, I'll call for the vote. Motion carries 7-0. Okay, hold on for me just a minute. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. And then we're going to CCIDA, LEDC, and LEDA and City of Lawton will join down here at the table for signing the documents. I need a motion to adjourn.
So here you have a video where this is a council meeting that the City of Lawton had. They had it on February 23rd, 2023. Up until before this meeting, there's really no citizens at all. There's nobody in KCA country even knew really what was about to happen. Again, they used the disguise, the Blue Braveheart project, and there was really no public participation at this meeting. There was a little bit. There was only, I think, a handful of citizens that were somehow involved in this. I don't know how, but I think there was, at least on this point in time, just a very, very minor level of resistance from local citizens in the area. But it's just the City of Lawton. You can see they voted on it 7-0. This is when they make it public. This is when they start telling the community there's a company called Westwind, and we're bringing them to Lawton, Oklahoma. Here's that resolution. The resolution that they just approved right there is called Resolution 2318. It's dated February 23rd. Just to give you some quick facts on this, to dilute it all down. At this point in time, the city only approved a large-scale refinery. And in that, they agreed to 2,335 jobs. In addition to that, Westwind agreed to invest $126 million into the large-scale refinery. So at this point in time, there is no requirement for a pilot plant. There's no requirement for a pilot plant contractually. And I find that very fascinating. And I think that stems from the fact that Westwind had a relationship with CVMR, and Westwind thought essentially that they could go right into this and they could come up with the funding and they could go straight to a full-scale operation. So I think that leadership on the Westwind side told the City of Lawton that they could do it. But what's interesting is also the City of Lawton believed them, and the City of Lawton knew about Westwind being a startup company, essentially. So I just find that boggling that city officials could invest so much into at such an early stage, at such an early point in time. They even put out a press release. This is a press release by the Lawton Economic Development Commission. And it's really this document right here that actually starts and uses the word Westwind Elements. and it goes through all the details, and it talks about all the entities that are involved. It talks about the Comanche County Industrial Development Authority, the Lawton Economic Development Authority, the City of Lawton, the Lawton Economic Development Commission. It's just, and so kind of after February, things go quiet, and at least on the record. And I've done a lot of research. I've searched and searched and searched, but it's been a lot. It's been kind of chaotic. But once I've continually found information, and then I slept and read it again and slept and read it again, and I slowly started to realize that, hey, between March and August, there appears to be a lot of chaos that happened with Westwind Elements. Westwind Elements couldn't, somewhere in this point in time, Westwind Elements was trying to secure funding. During this period, there's some, I don't have it, but it is on video. Westwind could not get the $126 million loan from their lenders. So because of that, their lenders required a pilot plant and a bankable feasibility study for Westwind Element. Additionally, some other interesting things happened. Westwind CEO fired Katrina Lucas. Many of y'all don't know who that is, but that's Westwind's first general counsel. And I really don't know why they fired her. The CEO goes on record and talks a little bit about this, but it's fascinating to me that right after you sign this big contract and these big term agreements with the City of Lawton, you fire your lead general counsel. And then something really bizarre also happens. The relationship between CVMR, that Toronto-based company, they dissolved their partnership, and I'm not sure who dissolved it. It seems like Westwind may have dissolved it, but it's not quite clear. I think Westwind did, though, because I've seen some comments say that CVR, quote unquote, never delivered. So here we are, the City of Lawton's all in, and all of a sudden Westwind loses their lead technical expert. Again, CVR is loaded with patents. CVR claims to have technical expertise. CVR says they can build. So it's fascinating. And to add insult to injury, the City of Lawton knew about many of these things. And this is just I don't know for a fact. I don't have any documents to say this, but there is circumstantial information that suggests that the City of Lawton is well aware of CVMR backing out. Westwind hires a brand new general counsel. That general counsel is Kelly Masters. She still is the current general counsel. Westwind and the City of Lawton. All this activity, and this is again, all this activity causes the City of Lawton, CDID, LEDA, LEDC, they all have to renegotiate terms. The main reason is because, again, Westwind couldn't secure the funding, and Westwind was told they had to build a pilot plant. None of this stuff was in the original February 2023 term agreement. So I'm trying to envision, if I were Kaylee Long, like how she felt at this particular time, and what network did she tap into to go and find her current engineering team? Because somehow, essentially in a matter of weeks, she hires a brand new engineering team that comes in fresh and cold, not really knowing what's going on, but I'm sure they're like, yeah, Kelly's saying, yeah, we're going to go to Lawton. Can y'all guys build me a plant? And these guys are like saying, yeah, because my theory is that there's a lot of money, and they're going to be like, yeah, they're not going to turn all this money. And so she hires an engineering team, and most of these guys are related to an organization known as Valet. And most of these guys are all retired. They're happily retired. They've got a number of years of experience in refinery work, but they're scattered all over the place. Some are in Europe. Some appear to be living in North America. One of them is a gentleman that just has 4 years of experience, but this is her new team. Another thing that happens is Westwind tells the City of Lawton, nope, I'm sorry, we can't make 2,335 jobs. We can only do 735. That's okay with Lawton. They still go through. Westwind agrees to issue, and this is bizarre. I don't know where this came from, but Westwind agrees to issuing 300 shares and valued in current value of $400,000 to the Lawton Economic Development Commission. And there's information that Westwind continues to recruit. They're trying to recruit investors. There's an investor meeting on March 30th, 2023 in Oklahoma City. And what I find really fascinating is there's a bench warrant issued for the Westwind CEO, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Here's just a quick slide to prove to everybody there's documents on Katrina Lucas, the general counsel. Again, Katrina Lucas is probably the one that was involved in writing all the initial term agreements that the city of Lawton dealt with. At least she probably, gave her blessing and said, the CEO, this is in a position to sign. But if you look at it, you can see on or about on the right, on the bottom right, there's an image where it says item 10, on or about March 27, 2023, contrary to the employment agreement, Kaylee Long orally informed Katrina that her position was terminated. So just want to share that with everybody that in the middle, right after Kaylee Long signed a term agreement with the city of Lawton, she terminates her general counsel just about a month later. This is a little bit about the change in technical experts. You can see on the left, there's that guy named Kamran Kazan again. You can see Kaylee in the center. She goes after a guy named Michael Cox. She states this on the record. She says somehow she starts with Michael Cox, and it's Michael Cox who starts to assemble the new technical team. And this is the new technical team that's in place right now. That's a part of the current Westwind operation to try and set up a pilot plant and refinery in Lawton, Oklahoma. But there's a little twist here. The CEO, Kaylee Long, discloses that she starts, I'm not sure exactly where she is right now because I haven't seen any records, but she states that she is suing CVMR. So trust me, there's going to be documents come out once this comes out on dates and times and reasons and why, and we'll get a hold of that information. But it's just very concerning that the supposed experts that Kaylee initially trusted, again, Kaylee vetted them. She flew to Toronto. All of a sudden, she's suing them, and all of a sudden, she's split with them. So I'm not sure what happened. And now all of a sudden, she places all her trust into a guy named Michael Cox. So on this slide, we have what were referred to as Section Form Ds by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And if I could have everybody focus on the left, you'll see basically the document on the left is dated February 8th, 2023. This is before the city of Lawton votes to support Westwind. On this Section D form appears both Kaylee Long and Kazan Karam. And again, that's August 2023. I'm sorry, that's February 2023. And then if we look on the document on the right, in August 2023, she switches to a guy by the name of Michael Cox. I just mentioned that earlier. So again, what really happened between February and August, I'm not exactly sure, but we're going to find out eventually. But it's safe to say they separated, and Kaylee exercised poor judgment, in my opinion, and initially by trying to say that CVMR was the team, and eventually she said, no, we don't need you. We're going to go another direction. And this is interesting because she's committed. She has to come up with over $100 million and all this other stuff and find people who can do a very niche project. Here is the investor meeting that happened in March 30th, 2023 in Oklahoma City. At this investor meeting, obviously, is a room full of investors. There's the former CEO of Boeing is there. The mayor of Lawton is there. The chairman of the Comanche Nation is also there. And I'm not exactly sure who the rest of the individuals are in this photo, but there's an investor meeting, and she continues to try and recruit people to come into Westwind Elements. And then I remember I told y'all that there was a warrant issued for Kaylee Long. That happened out of Washington County. It was filed on July 10th, 2023. If you look on the right, you can see on July 31st, she failed to appear. On August 7th, there was an order of suspension, and then a bench warrant was issued. If you want to go look more into this issue, I encourage you to go to the Oklahoma State Courts Network, and you can figure out more information about that. Now let's fast forward a little bit back to some city politics here. Again, I told you it was a little bit chaotic from the summer for Westwind, essentially the summer of 2023. So Westwind comes back to the city of Lawton, and they're asking the city officials, hey, we couldn't get funded, but we think we can still move forward with this if we do a bankability study and if we do a pilot plant. And again, you can see basically on here the documents. It says that the redevelopment for a total of 735 full-time employees. The annual average compensation is no less than $100,000 plus benefits, yada yada yada. Again, what's really fascinating is this little blurb in the very center: common stock. To support the economic development, the redeveloper shall, as additional consideration, issue 30 shares of unrestricted common stock to Westwind Elements Incorporated, valued at $400,000 to LEDC, to be held in the benefit of economic development. This was not in the original February agreement. So this is kind of where we are right now. And then the city of Lawton puts out a press release, and they change things, but they dilute basically their resolution. This is the resolution in a more palatable format, telling everybody that we're going to do 735 jobs and yada yada yada. Now let's switch forward to this pilot plant issue. Now that Westwind has to build a pilot plant, how is it going to get done? What's it going to look like? How's it going to function? What are the operational processes? What are the risks? In the next few slides, let's start and dive into that issue. I know a number of you on the call may have some questions and concern about this, and I'm going to do my best to explain what I believe are some of the environmental risks, some of the health and safety risks, the public health risks. But again, please be in mind, there's no written documents that Westwind have released on any of their processes. They've offered 2 town halls. They've conducted a couple of interviews. But aside from that, there's not a whole lot of information out there. And so this is my best attempt at trying to explain the pilot plant operation for Westwind Elements. Here's the location of the pilot plant site. It's sitting on a 40-acre site. It's located on the western boundary of the city of Lawton, the city limits. It's in an area called the quote-unquote industrial park. It sits basically a little bit less than 2 miles south of another well-known business called Goodyear Tire and Rubber. You can see the Goodyear Tire and Rubber business just to the north. But it's sitting on a 40-acre lot. This lot, again, this property, I believe, is owned by the Comanche County CCID, Industrial Development Authority. Here's a quick little diagram of the nearest resident to the pilot plant. The nearest resident is about a mile away from the pilot plant site. Now, with regard to current tribal land, there is some tribal land by the pilot. The pilot plant itself right now is not designated as tribal land, but it's close. It's about a mile away from a location that's pretty much sacred to Kiowas, Comanches, and Apaches. More so, there's a lot of connection to the site that's known as Deal Mission by Comanches. The Deal Mission is a site that was established in the, I can't remember exactly when, but I want to say it's in the 1880s, maybe late 1880s. We had a beloved missionary come and he established a mission, and that's that site right there. So it's about a mile away from the pilot refining location. This is a little overview of the pilot plant. It's about 35 feet wide by 115 feet long. The interior space is supposedly about to be around 4,680 square foot. Inside that space, that's where they're going to do their refinery work. They're going to build another building. It's just a little under 5,000 square foot. In that building, it's going to be their admin offices, their storage, their other processes. I believe showers probably are going to be in there and some other things. Again, they're saying it's for the purposes to refine cobalt, nickel, and other minerals. I find it bothers me, that term, other minerals, because there are other hazardous processes out there in the metal refining world. We're not really discussing those other processes because they're only saying they're doing nickel and cobalt. But long term, I think other process refinery changes are potential. They're saying this building is strong; it can withstand 130-mile-an-hour winds. Just on the top of the structure, there's going to be something called a thermal oxidizer. They're going to say this thing operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Right now, it's currently under construction as we speak. The most recent information I have, based off what Westwind is saying, is that they're targeting a commissioning date of June 2024, and their goal is to let this thing produce 220 metric tons of nickel powder per year. So this, they come and say there's going to be some jobs. Here's the job breakdown for the first. By FY24, they're going to have 40 staff. By 2026, they're going to have 85 staff. A third of that staff are going to be operators. They say they're going to make between 50K to 80K. A third of that staff are going to be maintenance. They're going to be paid 50K to 80K. A third of it, and the remaining staff are going to be engineering and administration. They're saying the engineers are going to earn about 150K to 180K per year. They say they started a partnership with Great Plains Technology Center. And most recently, what's really fascinating, and again, they've from what I know, they've been trying to recruit and hire folks for a while. But as of December 4th, 2023, Westwind has only one staff living in Lawton, Oklahoma. So at all these jobs they promised, it seems like they only got one staff right now out of the Lawton area. This is a little process diagram. I don't want to go too much into this, but this is a screenshot from a town hall that Westwind did. And it basically says they're going to make nickel powder, 20 metric tons. On the top right, they're going to have a feed system. You kind of see that little ladder on the top right, and they have a feed system. They're going to feed material into what's called a reactor. So that kind of tube on the right is called a reactor. There's a number of different processes going on here. There's a number of different liquid chemicals being created. This refinery process is going to occur between temperatures of 200 degrees upwards of slightly above 400 degrees. But what's really to me is this is a proprietary process. It's also a very dangerous and hazardous process, and I'll explain why. A little bit about I think some of you may be wondering, is any mining going to go on? Is any resource extraction going to go on in Lawton? And they're saying no. What they're saying is they're going to buy their supplies, or what they call feedstock or feed supplier, from the mixed hydroxide precipitate markets. They're saying they're going to import MHP from potentially, they don't know for sure, but they have stated maybe places like Indonesia. There's a mine in New Caledonia called the Gore Nickel Cobalt Mine. I've got a link on here. I can provide it to you. You can Google it. But Westwind has to go out in the market, and they're going to have to purchase their feedstock. And this feedstock contains the mineral-rich metals that they're looking for, the cobalt and the nickel. Back to that process diagram that I referenced. I said it's a very dangerous process. It is dangerous because it creates it's founded on a process called the carbonyl-Mond reaction. It takes basically 1 part nickel, 4 parts carbon monoxide, and it creates nickel carbonyl gas. And they call it quote unquote cold at 200 degrees. And when these things happen, when you mix carbon monoxide with nickel, it creates a reaction. And that reaction turns and creates a gas. That's the foundation of their refinery process. But that process is pretty dangerous. That gas is it's essentially toxic and lethal. So in the pilot plant, to account for the dangers and hazards of the gas, Westwind Elements says that they've implemented what we call engineering controls. One engineering control is they're saying that the entire building, the pilot plant, is going to be under negative pressure. In our world, we're like, well, what does that really mean? In my head, what degree of negative pressure is the space going to be under? They haven't given a value, but what they did state is there's going to be 8 air changes per hour. that means every hour the air in the nickel plant is going to be entirely recycled, supposedly. There's supposed to be what we call local ventilation controls. They're going to have what they say are 3 fans. They're going to have 2 of them on at all time. These fans are going to be doing all this ventilation and removing this nickel carbonyl gas from the any potential gas. Again, this is I didn't mention it earlier, but fundamentally their system is referred to as a closed loop gas system, meaning no gases can escape. But that's not true. There are definitely ways for gas to escape. That's why they have these controls built in place. They're saying they're going to do indoor air quality monitoring. They're going to have these fancy gas monitors. They're going to put what we call passive dosimeters, or basically carbon monoxide alarms in the place. They're going to put carbon monoxide detectors on their personnel. And they're going to have all these controls in place. And it sounds really great, but I have a number of questions about that. And I'll talk a little about that in a second. So, as many of you may know or might not know, when it comes to hazardous gases, we have what are called exposure levels, or we have what are called concentrations. We can actually measure the concentration of a particular chemical or gas in an indoor space. And we can actually design industrial places to do certain things at certain concentrations. So the pilot plant per Westwind is designed really to do 3 things when it comes to mitigating risk, mitigating the worker hazards. Again, we're just talking about the inside. I'll talk a little bit about the environmental hazards in a little bit. If this stuff gets out, we can talk about, well, I do have slides on that. But for now, we're talking about, they're trying to recruit our Comanche people. They're trying to recruit our non-tribal Comanche. They're trying to recruit all kinds of people, and they're going to put them in this place and expose them to this gas, 365 days a year. They have sensing equipment inside the pilot plant. That sensing equipment can sense nickel carbonyl gas at a concentration of 1 part per billion. When that equipment senses gas at 2 parts per billion, they're saying that the pilot plant is going to go under what they call a quote unquote controlled ramp down. If the refinery, if the pilot plant reaches a concentration of 4 parts per billion, they're saying the entire plant is going to automatically shut down. And I'm just fascinated on how that is going to occur. To do what they're saying seems theoretically possible, but Westwind has never built something this complex before. There's a number of instrumentation involved in making this happen. There's a number of electrical wiring involved in making this happen. There's a number of other processes that must work in order for all of this to work properly. There's sensors, there's switches. It's a complex thing, and I'm not one to speak on it. I'm just telling you, I've been around a number of engineers, and I've heard a number of engineers say they're going to design a system, and I've seen them design something, and they flip the switch, and something just doesn't work right. It generally is the case most of the time. So this is kind of an interesting thing that really I don't have a whole lot of experience with, but I do have a lot of experience with other kinds of monitoring systems. The plant has a leak detection system. They're calling it, we call it a continuous monitoring system, but more specifically, they got a chemiluminescent analyzer. They're not using these. They're not using what I'm showing you, but these are devices that are going to be in the pilot plant, and it's going to be measuring the air inside the pilot plant. One thing I haven't really told y'all about nickel carbonyl gas yet is that it does what we refer to in chemistry as decomposes, quote unquote decomposes. So if not to get too into the chemistry, but again, there's 1 part nickel, 4 parts carbon monoxide. That's in a contained environment. That's inside the pressurized pipes. But if there's a leak and that gas gets out of the pipes, the gas quickly decomposes. What that says to me, and I don't know if that may, I'm going to try and get this to register with everybody, is let's say, again, this is a 135-foot long plant. Let's say you have a leak on the right side of the plant, but on the left side of the plant at the far end is the analyzer. Because of this decomposition issue, and what I really mean by that is basically the nickel separates from the carbon. It goes back to 1 part nickel and 4 parts carbon monoxide. It separates. So you have 2 different elements here. It's very tricky, and it's very, I don't see how it's possible for a chemiluminescent analyzer to get an accurate measurement when you have this decomposition issue happening, and it starts to happen right at the leak. So what I'm saying is this stuff is dangerous. I'm not sure how accurate the analyzers are going to tell you the true concentration of the hazard inside the plant because of the chemistry, because of the decomposition issue. And in essence, what I'm telling you is you'll have nickel powder, fine nickel powders inside the pilot plant if there are leaks. I don't know how accurate this equipment is. And it's important because, again, the entire engineering control system is based off the information from this piece of equipment. Westwind hasn't told us exactly what kind of analyzer they're going to use. I can personally tell you that not every analyzer is the same. You have analyzers made all over the place. You have American-based analyzers, you have Europe-based analyzers, you have China-based analyzers. All of them function differently, and all of them have various degrees of what we would call error. So I don't know. They've not given us the spec sheet, but as a professional, it's this piece of equipment that's extremely critical because the entire system is built off the information that this unit provides. Let's talk about OSHA. I know some of y'all have heard of OSHA before. OSHA has what they call permissible exposure limits. The permissible exposure limit for OSHA, which is the federal law, is 1 part per billion over an 8-hour time-weighted average. I looked into a little bit. I looked into this issue. I actually called Canada. I called my counterparts with what they refer to as the Ministry of Labor. And I talked to Canada, and I was like, what is the exposure limit in Ontario? And Canada told me there is no exposure limit. And as soon as they told me that, that's not good news. That basically says in Canada, you can be exposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and it's okay. But when you get to the United States, the government here, OSHA only allows workers to be exposed to 1 part per billion of nickel carbonyl. Why is that important? That issue alone causes a number of concerns for me. People, I can tell you right now, is the pilot plant safe? The pilot plant is designed, again, to operate at 1 part per million. But if it operates at 1 part per million, that's already violating federal law. That's already violating OSHA standard. Again, Westwind is going to continue to allow workers to work in an environment at 1 ppb. They're going to do a controlled rep down at 2 ppb, and at 4 ppb, they're going to allow an automatic shutdown. If you ask, maybe my assessment is not accurate, but if you ask me, the design controls inside the pilot plant may not be right. There could be a big problem there. The potential solution is maybe, just maybe, all of those fancy fans, the negative pressure, all the monitoring gadgets, maybe all the thermal oxidizer, all this stuff, maybe it all needs to turn on at 1 part per billion. But Westwind has it all turning on at 4 parts per billion. What that basically means, folks, is your employee, your family, if they're working in here, is going to be exposed above a threshold that science says is going to cause health effects. And I don't know if these Canadian-based experts understand this. They've never practiced safety in the United States. I can tell you personally, I have friends who work for OSHA. I've been through OSHA inspections. It's black and white. There is no bending. You cannot put people in a place above 1 ppb. If you do, you're violating law. Another thing about nickel carbonyl gas. Literature says that at 2 parts per million, individuals will be immediately in a situation where it is dangerous to their life or health. We call that IDHL. Don't take my word for it. You can go to the link on this page. This is a federal site, OSHA.gov. 2 ppm, 2 ppm. If you're sitting at 2 ppm, you might not be right afterwards. If you're inhaling that, you might not go home that day. You might go to the hospital. You might be nauseous. You might not ever recover the same. It says it would cause quote unquote irreversible or delayed adverse health effects. Just another concerning thing. Let's say in our world, we have something called acute toxicity and chronic toxicity. And basically we're saying that acute basically means like something that happens to your health really quickly. If you are exposed to nickel carbonyl gas, acute effects will happen basically in 12 to 36 hours. You'll start with a headache, dizziness, and you'll maybe have some nausea. But the second part of that is you'll have delayed symptoms. What will happen is something called chemical pneumonia, basically. And I can explain that. That goes back to the degradation of the reaction. Again, you have nickel and carbon monoxide. If you breathe that in, that happens inside your lungs. The nickel particles separate. They land in your lungs. The carbon monoxide is brought into your bloodstream. This can be fatal at certain concentrations. There's something called acute lethality, or we call it LC50. LC50 is kind of a term that we say that if you're exposed to this much, if a certain group of individuals are exposed to a certain amount of concentration, 50% of those individuals or 50% of those organisms will experience death. And so here, there's been some lab studies done on animals. And as an example, if you take, let's say, a rat or a mouse, if you take 100 mouses or mices or whatever you want to call it, and you expose them to a little over 9 ppm of nickel carbonyl gas, in 30 minutes, if 100 of those mouses are exposed to 9 ppm, 50 of them will die. If you get a rabbit and you expose that rabbit to 42 to 168 ppm, if you get 100 rabbits, 50 of those rabbits will die in 30 minutes. And again, we call it the LC50. This is facts. You can go to the internet and you can figure this out yourself. So let's talk a little bit about leaks. Leaks happen, they're inevitable, and I want to play this video for everybody to hear.
Gentlemen, I have a question for you, and it's going to be 3 parts. One, you say you have about 200 years of technology with this process. In that 200 years, what we would like to know is what is the worst case scenario accident that has happened?
Well, we're not here to lie or skirt around the truth.
And we don't want to hear that.
It's a lethal substance, and there has been events in the past that we have had a fatality, and what was learned from that fatality has been developed.
I've got a number of different videos, but I just wanted to show everybody that Westwood knows this. And I wanted to show y'all that they know that the plant leaks. And this drives my point home that they need, I want to talk to them, or they need to talk to somebody. Somebody needs to talk to Westwood and figure out that 1 ppb issue by federal OSHA in the United States. Again, these technical experts are coming from a place that doesn't have an 8-hour limit. There is no 8-hour limit. I spoke to Canada themselves, and I've seen their information on the internet. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this. There is a lot of scientific literature regarding the health hazards related to nickel carbonyl gas exposure. From acute hazards to chronic hazards. Again, it talks about the respiratory cancer issues. It talks about the toxicity in human health. There's a document that looks at almost 50 years of data. You can see the Saran T document, the mortality of workers at a nickel carbonyl refinery, 1950 to 2000. There's a lot of good information out there where a number of scientists have already looked into this and documented that this is a known hazard and it's very serious. For some of you, if you're concerned about wanting to know more information about the human health hazards in what we call toxicology or environmental toxicology, I just want to refer y'all to this document. This document is in the National Library of Medicine's repository, and it talks about how nickel metal can harm your own health and as well as the environment. And I'm not going to go into that. I've got a lot of information to share, but I just want to provide people with a decent reference. This is data from Ontario, Canada. It's Ontario Occupational Disease Statistics. It talks about nickel-carbonyl chronic toxicity poisoning. It talks about the increased risk of long-term lung damage. Now, you might hear Westwind say this is neutrally safe. Everything we're doing is fine. But there's something going on here. There's basically, at low exposure, the data suggests that this stuff causes cancer. Westwind is not saying any of this. They've, from what I've read at their town halls, they've not provided this information publicly. So I wanted to share that with y'all. There's a lot of literature out on its cancer risk, but this is actually statistics on smelting and refining in the Ontario area. I haven't explained this to y'all yet, but there is only in North America, in the entire continent of North America, there's only one nickel carbonyl plant, and that plant is in Sudbury, Ontario. And many of the technical team members all hail and have experience or have worked for the nickel carbonyl plant in Sudbury, Ontario. So I suspect those individuals know, and they have friends who have gotten sick from working at the refinery, but that's just something that they've not shared with anybody. Let's talk about the pilot plant a little bit more. What kind of chemicals are going on? What are they storing or going to have out there at the pilot plant? I also have a photo on this page. This is an individual named John. He seems like a very nice man. He's a very smart man, a very passionate man. But somebody asked, again, he answered that question about a worst case scenario. He goes on, and I quote, he says, if an act of God were to occur, the volume of gases would not impact the community. He's referring to the pilot plant where it's at right now. The problem I have with that is Westwind hasn't told anybody. They haven't quantified what exactly is their total storage volumes for all of their chemicals, for all of their liquids, for all of their diesel, for their propane. They really didn't clearly say this. It took a little bit of sleuthing, but they're not only having nickel carbonyl gas on the property, they're also having iron carbonyl gas, and they're having cobalt carbonyl gas. Those also have other hazards as well. Again, they're not making in situ, or they're not creating carbon monoxide on site. They're purchasing carbon monoxide from a gas company. They've got these gases right here. But on the bottom left, I have a question. What's the max quantity of X gas that could be stored on site at the pilot plant? And this is a very important question because there's people that live close to this pilot plant. Many of these gases are flammable. They have explosion hazards. As a safety person, we have standards for how, what are safe distances away in the event of an emergency when something ignites. This stuff has we call it ignitability values to it. I don't know them exactly. I have not had the chance to investigate at what threshold will nickel carbonyl gas ignite. It just have a number of different questions, and you can literally go out there and you can find cases where there have been some explosions related to these gases. So again, Westwind is saying, don't worry about it. The volume is not going to impact the community, but it's still concerning for me There's people that live there. One thing I haven't told anybody that is fascinating is there's something called the molecular weight. The molecular weight of nickel carbonyl gas is heavier than the molecular weight of air. So what that means is if there is a leak, the nickel carbonyl gas is going to sink. It's going to stay at ground level. It's going to stay at what we call the breathing zone level. Your average human ranges, I don't know, somewhere between 4 to 5 feet. So there's not going to be this homogeneous mixture. You're going to have regular atmospheric air on top, and below that air, there's going to be nickel carbonyl gas. So inside the plant, if there is a leak, the gas is going to be on the bottom of the space inside the building. And if the gas gets outside of the building, my theory is that it's going to sink and drop. And again, it's all about total volume. If they have a massive amount of volume, this stuff will decompose, but it will disintegrate and go back to nickel and carbon monoxide. But if depending on volume, it's like how many people could potentially be affected. We really don't know unless we get some more numbers from Westwind. They do talk a little bit about tornado protection. Here it is. I just want to show y'all that. I don't have a whole lot to say on that one. I do know that Lawton has had a number of F2, F3, F4 tornadoes. I don't have to preach that to everybody back home. We all know it. We deal with, we're in Tornado Alley. We have tornadoes on a yearly basis. Let's hope that never happens. But they're saying that they're building this thing to withstand 130 miles per hour. So let me talk a little bit about emergency response. I know some of y'all may be concerned about that, so let me play this for you.
First responders, will they need additional hazmat training?
So we'll be working on emergency response protocols alongside Lawton first responders. Typically, when we're talking about additional hazmat training, it is not a dedicated hazmat course required in addition. It is an awareness course given and offered by Westwind in order to make sure that they're up to date. All emergency response handled on property is governed by Westwind protocols. This means that any first responders on facility are accompanied their entire time on facility by trained and cleared response personnel from Westwind side as well.
So basically somebody in the audience was asking about first responders, and that was Westwind's response. Westwind is basically saying they're going to handle everything on their property. But what about outside of the property? That's kind of concerning. You know, what if this stuff goes over to that home that's a mile away, or what if this affects Goodyear? Goodyear has what they call air intakes that supply ventilated air to the Goodyear plant. You know, the winds are strong in Oklahoma. If there's a failure somewhere in the ventilation system, let's hope there's not. You know, I do have some level of faith that if they were to build the pilot plant, they would dial all the issues out and they would get everything working right. They would test it. They would make sure everything works appropriately. But they really just haven't told any of those things yet. I'm just making assumptions here.
First responder.
So this is from another document that I found by a company called Valet. This is not what Westwind put out, but if you're a community member, this is how you might find out about an emergency. You can see basically it starts with Vel. It might start with Westwind, maybe calling 911, and then 911 puts out dispatch. And what's fascinating is Westwind hasn't said this, but there's some kind of a public alert. Like, what exactly is the public alert? Because there's essentially like immediate risk to the public if there is an event. So I don't know how people are going to find out about an emergency just quite yet. You know, in Oklahoma, we have tornado sirens, and those tornado sirens are turned on whenever we're in a tornado warning or something like that. So I'm wondering, like, are they going to have sirens or something like? I'm not really quite sure. But not everybody's going to be near a phone. Not everybody's going to be watching TV. Not everybody's going to be on the internet. Like, how are they going to notify the public quickly if there is an emergency? This is an image of the refinery in Sudbury, Ontario. I just wanted to show y'all, to give y'all an idea on what something might look like on a larger scale. Here you can see a number of different things. If you look at the orange color, that's basically storage tanks, what they call process gas storage tanks. What exactly is that? I'm not sure. Is it flammable? Is it hazardous? I'm going to say probably so. They have carbon monoxide going on. They have liquid carbonyl storage. You can see the green. And this is, you know, when I talk about volume. So if something comes to Lawton, my question is what is going to be the volume of all these chemicals? There's no answer to that. There's no information on that. But so I'm left to like assume that, hey, there's potentially going to be some large storage tanks going on right there by Dale Mission, right there by Goodyear, right there by, I didn't show it in my earlier photos, but there's a large housing neighborhood just another mile or two to the north, I believe. So still a number of questions. What if something goes wrong? If something were to, I don't think anything's happened at this specific plant at Copper Cliff, but we know all across industry, you know, in the oil and gas industry, accidents do happen. Here's a document about emergency response. This is from we call this the ERG. This is the ERG, the Emergency Response Guidebook. If you look at the top left, you can see I pointed out nicocarbonyl. It says to go to basically what's called Guide 131. And in this, I just want to show y'all that there, if there is an emergency, this is the reference kind of that first responders generally reference when handling and trying to figure out what to do when there's a terrible disaster, more specifically a disaster that could involve nicocarbonyl. But of note, in that ERG guidance document, if you look on at this table, this is basically what they call isolation and protective action distances. It's broken down basically by a category for small spills and another category for large spills. So for the pilot plant, because Westwind hasn't told us how much volume of whatever chemical they're going to have, it's really hard to discern if there was a spill, how it would be classified. Would it be classified in a small category or the large category? And this is important. It's important because if there's a small spill, they're saying to isolate the public 0.8 miles away from the spill. That's okay, 0.8 miles. But what the heck is a small spill for Westwind? We don't really know. If there is a large spill, they're saying basically everybody within 7 miles during the day needs to get the heck out of there. And if something happens at night, everybody needs to go further. They need to go 7+ miles away. So, you know, it's an important question. What is the volume of all these things that they're storing out there? They haven't told anybody. If the volume would potentially could lead to a large spill, you're talking about the potential situation in an emergency to have to evacuate several thousand people who live within a 7+ mile radius of that pilot plant right there on the west side of Lawton. And that's not even talking about the cleanup. We're just talking about the immediate emergency response for safety. The whole cleanup thing, I don't even want to talk about that. But anyhow, Westwind has hired, they hired a technical team. Many of these are retirees who are career experienced people in the refinery industry, but they've hired a few different companies to do some of their design work. I just wanted to show everybody. They hired a company out of Texas called AE Solutions. It's not quite clear what AE Solutions is doing for Westwind, but AE Solutions has an oil and gas background. They do have a website if you're curious to learn more about them. A little bit about permitting. They've also hired a permitting consultant. There's a consultant called Tora Consulting. They also have an oil and gas background. You can go to their website. But I believe, again, this goes back to their technical team not really, in my opinion, knowing how to operate in the States. So they're trying to hire somebody who's going to help them. The CEO doesn't really know what she's doing with regard to environmental regulation. So she's just putting up money to try and get people she's paying folks to say, hey, help me get through the permitting process. And Tora Consulting's like, yeah, we'll help you. And that's kind of what's really going on with that. A little bit more about permitting. I know some of y'all may have been aware, but there's something that's called an applicability determination that recently was released by the Oklahoma Environmental Quality Department. That was released in December 2023. And basically, Westwind asked the state, do we need a permit? And the state said, no, you don't need a permit. And there's a number of reasons why. But the state said, for the most part, that you don't need a permit because you really have small emissions. I'm sorry, you're not permit exempt, but you still need a permit, but you only really need a permit for your emergency generator. You can see I got a red box on the column right here. They have submitted a documentation to the state and said that in the state, folks did some calculations and they came up with a number of 4.48 tons per year of exhaust gas from the generator. And because those generators are exhausting gas, Westwind's going to need an air permit. But also on that chart, there's something called reactors and RTO. You can see they have nitrogen oxides at 0.01 TPY, carbon monoxide at 0.84, volatile organic compounds at 0.01, something called PM10. PM10, in a nutshell, is what is basically the nickel itself. They say they've told the state that they anticipate having a total emission of nickel metal and other particulates. It doesn't quite say it clearly, but PM 2.5 really is solid particulates at a very small scale. We're talking at 10 micrometers. That's what 10 means, micrometers of metal. So, and then you have sulfur dioxides. So in total, for their hazardous gases, they're saying that they're generating less than 1 ton per year. And because of that volume, according to Clean Air Act regulation, they are not required to have a permit for basically their hazardous gases, but they're just required to have a permit for their emergency generator gases. And here's basically a little press release that Westwind released that basically says just what I explained. On the top left, I have a red box and it says ODEQ response stated that while Westwind's total potential emissions fell under the threshold that would trigger a minor source permit requirement, the presence of the emergency generator still requires them to have a permit and submit a permit registration to the Air Quality Division at the state of Oklahoma. But on the box on the bottom, it basically says that permit registration is not subject to a review period. Therefore, it will not impact the construction timeline for the pilot plant. Real quickly, though, I just want to show everybody there's only one air monitor in Lawton, Oklahoma. It's nowhere near the pilot plant. I think it may be greater than 8 miles. What's concerning to me, though, again, this is a new industry. They say they are going to emit particles. Some of those particles they're allowed to emit can contain nickel, but no, they're not required by law to do any monitoring whatsoever. And I just find that to be personally like a gap in the regulation. Why do I say that's a gap? I mean, they've never worked in the U.S. Should they? There was at one of the town halls, there was a community member who asked nickel and recommended Westwind. I'm sorry, the community member recommended Westwind do their own air sampling, and Westwind didn't answer the question. And I believe it's not in the plan. Westwind has not stated they're going to do their own sampling. Westwind has stated they're not going to hire a disinterested party or a third party to do any air monitoring whatsoever. So quite frankly, if this pilot plant is commissioned, there's going to be no monitoring for the hazardous particles that they are authorized to emit. And again, they're only allowed to emit a total of less than 1 ton per year. But I just find that to not be acceptable, because again, this is a new industry and there's a number of unknowns. Also, there's a number of community concerns. So Westwind says this is going to be a quote unquote environmentally neutral process. And in my opinion, the only way to truly stand firm on that is to generate data that shows that. And at this point in time, their proposal is not going to include any kind of sampling outside of their operation that they're going to do or a third party is going to do. So as far as I'm concerned, they can't confidently make that statement without evidence. So this is, again, this is kind of a gap in the regulation. It's not in the United States, but in my opinion, without doing any air sampling, again, back to the whole issue of the carbonyl gas breaking down quickly, without any monitoring, without any data, I don't think anybody can confidently say that, at least around the pilot plant, that the environment would be safe, that environmental contamination would not happen. No one's going to know. Nobody's going to have the data to say that there is no contamination, unless there's maybe some soil sampling done, but that's not even in the term agreement. That's not something that the state of Oklahoma is going to require. Nobody's going to require any soil sampling. So this kind of is an issue to me. If Westwind or somebody would like to tell Lawton, Oklahoma and their citizens that it's environmentally neutral, they need to have, in my opinion, data to back that up. They need to have a lab run some analysis, and nobody's going to be doing that. Here's a image from that plant back in Canada. This is the large-scale refinery in Canada. In Canada, at that plant, they have basically site-specific air monitoring at the boundary lines. All the little green dots on this are air monitoring stations. They're measuring a number of different what we call parameters. They're measuring to include they're measuring particles. They're measuring the metal that comes out. They're sending those things to a lab. What I would like to see is the results of these measurements, but of course, Westwind doesn't have access to this information. This is information that's held in trust by the company in Sudbury, the company that's operating this plant. But Westwind keeps saying that it's safe for the environment, it's environmentally friendly, it's environmentally friendly, but they're not offering any data, in my opinion, to prove that all their controls they're saying they're going to put something called a baghouse filtration unit. They're saying they're going to put a thermal oxidizer. And yeah, if you look at the books, they say those things are going to, we call it cook it. They say they're going to cook everything that comes out of there. And in theory, it looks like it's going to do just that. But without the sampling, without the evidence, you never can know. There's always room for something to fail. There's always room for more emissions to occur than what you would expect. And at least at the operation that's going on in Sudbury, they're measuring on a regular basis. You can actually go to this website right here, airqualityontario.com. You can actually see, I'm showing you what we call emission exceedances, or others call them just exceedances. That plant that I just showed you in Sudbury, Canada, actually had exceedances for what we call 24-hour total suspended particulates. There they have a standard of you cannot release more than 120 micrograms per cubic meter of total suspended. And I know it's a little bit sciencey, but when we look at sampling, you start throwing in all these science terms. My point with this slide is in Sudbury, they had all the controls in place, and there were still exceedances. Things still got above the emission standard. And again, these are just exceedances. Let's not forget that they're still allowed to discharge pollutants anyways. They're still allowed to discharge emissions that have nickel particles, and that's totally okay. It doesn't, I still find that troubling. That means basically that if they don't go over a certain level, they're safe. They're not violating any law. But the problem with that is you have all this compounding effect going on outside of the environment over time. So it's still, in my opinion, concerning. You're still potentially going to impact animals, the aquatic environment, the fish. In Lawton, Oklahoma, there's a number of horses, there's a number of cattle all over the place. So again, this isn't quite fair. I'm telling you about a large-scale refinery. Westwind is really talking about a pilot plant right now. But there's still, no one's really monitoring what kind of emissions are coming out of there because they're getting a permit exempt. And when it comes to that diesel permit, they're going to have a diesel permit. They're going to allow to discharge basically particulates and other things related to combustion engines. When it comes to, and I can't speak for ODEQ, but really what it comes down to is when ODEQ comes down to that pilot plant, they're not going to take any samples of whatever's coming out of the generator. They're and I don't know this, maybe they can speak for, I'd like for them to speak for themselves, but I'm going to suggest ODEQ is going to look at the runtime on those generators. They're going to ask how much fuel Westwind has purchased over a year, and they're going to create their own calculations. And they're going to say, oh, you use this much fuel, the hours on your generator ran this much time. So we're going to theorize that your emissions are X, Y, and Z. And that's really the extent of the regulation that might come into play from the pilot air permit from DEQ. If there's any more, I'd love to know. But if DEQ is just worried about the generator, that's probably all they're going to do is look at the generator and say, you turned this thing on and it ran for 20 hours in a year. And they're like, okay, that's this much amount. They're going to do some calculations and yada yada. But no one's really going to be able to track the emissions from all the hazardous gas processes. That's not required to be tracked at all. And I think that's another a fail point in the process. Again, this slide just iterates that there's no site-specific air monitoring required at the pilot plant at all. And today, Westwind has not said that they do intend to do any air monitoring outside of the pilot plant. So if you want me to tell everybody listening right now that there are no environmental hazards, I can't 100% say that. It's plausible because there's no monitoring. It's plausible because systems fail. It's plausible because we've seen exceedances happen with systems in place. It's plausible that there still could be emissions. There's leaks. There's known leaks inside the plant. They have a known ventilation system that's supposed to suck all this stuff up. They're saying they're going to cook everything, but will it really do that? No one really knows because there's going to be no data to verify. There's probably going to be some logs on some instrumentation on the inside to measure pressures or measure resistance and yada, yada, yada. But to the public, there's really going to be no information to say, hey, our pilot plant is not harming your environment. They're going to tell you that, but where's the data? Where's the lab that's certified by some certifying body that says that this lab is running a method and this method is a proven method and we trust this method and it's going to be good enough to enter the legal arena, if you will. So let's watch something a little bit about, this is Kaylee Long. She's the CEO of Westwind, and she's talking about the lack of regulatory standards around the nickel industry in the United States. And I just want to play that for everybody.
Regulatory agencies that exist the best we can. Because a nickel refinery doesn't exist in the United States, there's permits that have to be created around this. And so starting small and growing also allows us to be, exposes us to be fully held accountable and take that time for the regulatory bodies that exist, to do the work to start drafting these permits. If we went.
Did y'all catch that? The regulatory authorities apparently have to come up with new processes and procedures and science and come up with new methods to create a permit to regulate the nickel industry. I'm not an air quality expert. I'm not really an expert in many things. I know a lot about a few things, and I call myself basically a general environmental health scientist. And what I mean by general environmental health scientist is I can scratch the surface of many of these. I can scratch the surface of many of these topic areas to include permitting. But I found this very interesting because if Westwind wants to continue on, they're already going to get the permit for the pilot plant. But if they want to get a permit for the large scale pilot plant, how's Oklahoma going to do that? I don't know. They've said they're going to do at the commercial scale, they're going to put, Westwind is going to build their own little air monitoring stations around the perimeter. But who's going to put air monitoring stations in the housing additions? Who's going to there's a cemetery at Dale Mission. Who's going to make sure that there's, no emissions landing at Dale Mission for KCA country? Who's going to make sure that, the little 2-year-old that's playing in their front yard a mile away at home? I mean, remember, this gas sinks. Who's going to monitor that community? There's no monitors there. Is Lawton going to do that? Is the state going to do that? Is Westwind going to do that? Who's going to have access to the data? That's important. Like, who's going to do the sampling? There's just so many questions here. Like, Comanche County is the city of Lawton, the state of Oklahoma has a lot of work to do if they're going to really provide the community with the confidence that they need. And it's going to be a high standard. If they can't set things up, there's always going to be a risk, and you can easily come in and you can probably sample. And again, there's been other nickel industry occurring in the country. It's associated with nickel plating. Nickel's associated with, obviously, open pit mining and underground mining. There's a lot of literature that talks about nickel contamination. I just find this very, very interesting. Now let's talk a little bit about a pilot plant cleanup, if there were a disaster. Oh my God, we're running short on time. I'm going to have to skip this, but basically they reserve 50. If there's an accident at the pilot plant, I think they have insurance around $15 million. I'm going to move a little bit quicker now, just to kind of I'm going past the pilot plant, and I'm going into basically a timeline for what Westwind is saying they're going to do. If Westwind moves past the pilot plant, what they're saying is they're going to build a commercial plant, and they're going to go in phases, and they're going to scale this thing up to a full scale in about, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years. And they're projecting $2 billion in profit, and they're projecting to generate up to 64,000 TPA of nickel products and yada, yada, yada. So let's go kind of switch gears and go to the commercial phase. This is the land that the city of Lawton has set aside if Westwind decides to build a large scale refinery. It's on 480 acres right by Goodyear. At the full scale level, the distances from the nearest resident gets to roughly 0.3 miles at the large scale level. And then Dale Mission gets about half a mile away. At the large scale level, Westwind is saying they're going to have 700. Again, initially their story was over 2,000 again, but now they're saying they're going to do 735 jobs. They're saying the chart on the right shows how the job scheme is going to grow over 5 years. But what's fascinating is they're going to need a large volume of engineers. These engineers are going to have some level of credentials from the academic sector, whether it's from college or a technical school. And the local census in the area shows that about 22% of the locals are college educated. And I'm personally from Lawton, Oklahoma. I don't really believe there's a lot of engineers in the city of Lawton. So of these 75 jobs, the high paying jobs, in my opinion, are not going to go to Lawtonians. They may not even go to Oklahomans, maybe just a handful of that. What Oklahomans, if there are jobs, they're going to be at the operator and maintenance level, especially in the Lawton area. And they're saying that they're going to offer 50 to 80K salaries for those individuals. Now let me move forward a little bit remember I told you CVMR and Westwind Elements joined teams back in February, and Westwind Elements told the city of Lawton that, hey, they're experts. So let's watch this video. This is going February 23rd, 2023.
Talking about the investment, this is an experimental situation. Well, it's not necessarily experimental. This is a process that has been refined by Dr. Cameron Cozen, and he is going to be 35% interest in this company, Westwind, and his company will build this plant. And it will be built to the specs of plants that he's built around the world. He's building one right now to handle nickel in Amarillo, Texas. They have a process to where the waste is John, you said it a minute ago, environmentally neutral. And the old process, it was an acid wash. They washed that out on the ground, and then they had that acid they had to do something with, and they just made big piles of it. This, they will have clean dirt left over that they can use. They can put it in the landfill. They can cover our soil, cover our trash in the landfill. And there will be other uses for it also. This is not necessarily a virgin process. He's been working on this process for years. He's got over 30 patents on it. And he is world renowned for his techniques and his processes of extracting minerals from the soil.
So that's Fred Fitch. He's basically going to bat for Westwind because at this point in time, people know that Westwind has really no experience in refining. But he's telling all the city leaders, Westwind hired the best. And he's saying that he supports CVMR. He's saying that CVMR is world renowned. They're highly respected and they know what they're doing. So he's saying this because the CEO of Westwind told him this. The CEO said, we got the best on the planet. So this is, February 2023. So this is one of the factors that led to the city council, in my opinion, signing the documents to go into terms agreements with Westwind. But again, this is February 20. As I told you earlier, there was a massive fallout. CVMR left the table sometime in the summer of 20, maybe not the summer, maybe the spring. Sometime CVMR left. As we speak right now, there's information that says that Westwind is suing CVMR. Those documents will come to surface at some point. But the point with me showing this video is that all the community leaders thought CVMR was the cat's meow. Westwind thought CVMR was the best of the best. Now let's fast forward to another month. Now we're going to go to December 4th, 2023. This is at a town hall. The CEO and the technical team is about to throw, Westwind basically is about to throw CVMR under the bus. Just watch this. This is really baffling to me. Like, how can Lawton and Westwind say CVMR is the best, and then a few months later, they're like, they're horrible. So let's watch this video.
Got a couple of questions about a facility in Amarillo. CVRM has an economic development agreement with Amarillo. Is Westwind going to duplicate what they're doing?
I'll take a stab at it. So CVMR is a company that had some kind of R&D experience with nickel carbonyl. I know that they haven't proceeded with that plant in Amarillo. But I can't speak on behalf of Amarillo. But what I can say is, no, we're not duplicating what CVMR is doing because CVMR has failed to show up. So you got to, any of you want to take a stab?
I think it's important to give some context here. When you're looking at different carbonyl operations in concept being brought up throughout the planet, CVMR's name comes up in a lot of these discussions. It's important to put the context that of the largest carbonyl refineries on the planet, CVMR has had their hand in none of them. They are very good at research and development and documentation. They are not an operational facility. They have not governed operational facilities. They don't have experience making product.
Sorry, I didn't know y'all couldn't hear it, but I just find it fascinating that everybody thought CVMR was the best. And then something happened. They severed their contract agreements, and the CEO of Westwind went into a new contract agreement with some other retirees in the industry. And I just think this is a concern too, because what if something happens with the current technical team now? Who knows? There's millions of dollars at stake here. If this technical team does something, and I haven't touched on this issue yet, but there are a number of patents in this interest in this industry. I don't know. I just question whether or not any patent infringements are occurring right now. That you're not gonna. I don't think anybody's gonna admit that. It's probably a pretty secret process on the design and what's going on in the nickel in the pilot plant. But CVMR has a bunch of patents. What the current team on Westwind, I think there's one guy that has like 10 or 12 patents, but they're going after some proprietary technology here to build this refinery plant, and that kind of concerns me too. So this is kind of the last point of my slide, and I just want to talk about what Westwind wants from the state of Oklahoma, because through this entire process, Westwind hasn't put their foot down and said that they want to build the pilot plant in Lawton, Oklahoma. They're basically saying, we will build the pilot plant if the terms are right. This is an interview that was done last December 12th, with an individual named Andrew Hayes. He operates a Facebook page called Voters of Comanche County or something like that. And the city of Lawton knows this. The governor's office, Governor Stith, the lieutenant governor of Oklahoma, they all know this. Is what Westwind wants if they want to come in and build a commercial plant in Lawton, is they basically want to be subsidized. They're calling it a quote unquote incentive package. They're according to the CEO, she's saying there's other states like Texas, Louisiana, and Montana, and she's evaluating their state incentive offers in their packages as well. In this video, she's basically saying that China has a stranglehold on the feed market that her refinery needs. She's saying that because China can outbid her, that sometimes she's not going to be able to go in alone. Westwind can't go in alone and compete to purchase raw material, to purchase the feed material. She is basically expecting state taxpayers in the state of Oklahoma to fund in portion her business. She wants taxpayers to fund in portion the refinery work in Lawton, Oklahoma. And if taxpayers don't give her what she thinks is good, she's going to take her operation somewhere else. And this is something that is really flying under the radar. This really isn't in much news outlets. It took me a while to figure this out. And so really, it looks like she wants to have this pilot plant going. She wants to get to this. She has to get to this bankability study, and that study has to come out favorable. If it doesn't, all of this is going to fall apart. So I think there's a lot of pressure to make this pilot plant successful so that she can get access to a much larger package from the state of Oklahoma and others. So let's watch this video.
So, right now our objectives are in the state of Oklahoma is we're building the pilot plant in Lawton, but it is our hope to build the commercial plant in Lawton, and but we have to weigh in the incentives package from the state of Oklahoma compared to Texas and Louisiana and Montana. Montana's came in very strong. So again, it's our hope that we build the next refinery also in Lawton, but the state has to make sense here. And so, I am a fiscal conservative. I'm very anti-crony capitalism, any form of socialism, etc. And I do believe that the best economic environment is for like business to business competition 100%. The reality that we're facing in some of these critical industries is that you have businesses that are having to compete against the entirety of the People's Republic of China and the entirety of Russia. So Russia is a close second in terms of control of the nickel market. And so when I'm out there and I'm trying to lock in feedstock, like a nickel ore for our refinery, China can come in and lay down pallets of cash, you know, printed out by their government, and crush American businesses. So American business by itself cannot compete against the PRC. Yes, we can compete against each other. And so we do need support if we're going to show up in the time that the US government needs. And there is an impact being felt right now. So about a year and a half ago, the Pentagon had to stop deliveries of F-35 fighter jets because those jets were containing alloys like nickel, or mostly cobalt alloys, but I think there was some nickel in there, from China. China has sanctioned in one way or the other Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and I think Raytheon. They've banned 2 critical metals, like outright banned them. They're increasing tariffs, and our national defense stockpile is nearly depleted of these materials, as opposed to China, where they just put out an order for another 7,000 tons of cobalt for their strategic reserves. And so in order for us to show up on time for our national security needs, for our aerospace and defense, for our battery needs, there has to be some support. And so Westwind's strategy is to respect the taxpayer and not go out. I mean, we're not aggressively going after, you know, grant money or free checks. I mean, there are some DOE grants we're applying for, but we're looking for a subsidized debt vehicle that would earn the taxpayer more than what they would loan, and something that is de-risked. You know, there are, like, for instance, Texas does bond programs. They'll do a cost share and they'll debt finance a certain portion of a project, and those funds need to be returned. So we are trying to explore an attractive incentive that equips us to compete with China and equips the state of Oklahoma to compete with, you know, the Texases or the Louisiana Center out there, so that we can fund and build the commercial on time for the U.S.
Gotcha.
So
there you have it. They want to build a pilot plant in Lawton. They're trying to get favorable results for a bankability study. The pilot plant on the inside has some safety design concerns that I have. I've told you about this whole part per billion issue. I've told you about how they're saying they're environmentally neutral, but there's going to be no sampling data to really back that up, particularly on the environment area. They're going to tell citizens that you're not at risk. But what is all that based off of? Where is the evidence? They're not legally required by law to prove that they have evidence. The City of Lawton, the Lawton Economic Development Commission, none of the language that they wrote up requires them to do any environmental monitoring, at least at the pilot plant scale. These entities in Lawton, Oklahoma are relying on the regulatory authorities to do what they're supposed to do to keep the environment and the people safe. But there's gaps in the regulation. There's what I call I don't know this, but there's the term that we throw around called a technical deficit. I have a technical deficit. I don't understand the nickel carbonate process enough. I've never seen it before. It's never been in the United States. But Canada has different regulations. Their Canadians are coming in. It looks like they don't definitely understand the OSHA regulation. They've hired people to help them. Westwind has hired consultants to help them put together permit packages. It's just a lot of question marks on all of this. And for me, Westwind's not putting out any documentation at all. They're doing these little, in my opinion, these presentations are not well put together. They didn't really describe how the breakdown of nickel carbonyl gas occurs. They never told anybody about how to measure the gas. They've never even brought their health and safety expert down. They've really only brought 2 people down regular. They might have brought down another at one point in time. But their technical team is they're all I don't think they even have visas. They can't physically come here and work at all. So they're working on it, but they don't have visas right now. And again, the CEO, she's in a lawsuit with her attorney. She hired a new attorney. She's in a lawsuit with CVMR. She's got these other scientists under contract, but there's just a number of unknowns, a lot of chaos. I mean, why is she getting a bench more in arrest when she's in the middle of signing all these $100 million contracts? I don't know. But it's just none of it collectively gives me confidence, and I don't know how y'all feel about it, but that's kind of the end of my presentation. And I want to thank you for your time and attention. And I think we'll move on to maybe questions. Is that right?
Yes, thank you so much, Brandon, for this very informative presentation. We will take a couple of questions, but we're hoping that if people do have additional questions, that they'll go ahead and put them in the chat so that we can save the chat and have those questions answered in the follow-up email. So the 2 questions that we have from the chat that haven't been answered yet, one is wanting to know if the current air quality site has the ability to actually detect cobalt.
No, the current site, it's measuring for, I think, something called PM 2.5. There's something called basically filters, and I don't know this. I don't know how. I've never been to that site before. I can't really speak for it, but I don't think that it does. I think that it's probably doing basically a quantification, or it's basically counting the particles. It's not doing a collection and analyzation. You basically have to collect a sample on a filter and take it to a lab for identification. That's really the only way to identify if cobalt or nickel is present. You can't really identify any particulate basically by a count, or these things use lasers, and these are fine sensitive lasers, and they are able to count particles. And so that's what these lasers do. They just do counts. So that's what I think the air station in Lawton does. It doesn't do any species identification of particles.
Thank you for that. And then we had one more question that hadn't been answered in the chat. And this is so if the refinery was to like melt down or something like that was to happen, what would be the estimate on how many miles the radiation or the exposure would reach from the site? Like, what would be the impact on that?
Yeah, again, that goes back to what the heck's there in the first place and how much is there. And as well as, the environmental atmospheric conditions, the wind conditions, the temperature of the day. It's if you got a 5-gallon bucket, you can do modeling and you can say, hey, this liquid carbonyl that's in this 10-gallon bucket theoretically would go. I'm not the expert on this, but I'm trying to answer this the best that I can. Is that this gas, it's all dependent on all these other variables. But if there's a strong tornado and winds are at like 100 miles an hour, it would seem that it could go beyond a mile. It could go a few miles. The stuff breaks down in a matter of minutes, but if under certain conditions, this stuff could go a few miles. I don't know how far, but it would land, and then you would have this problem with trying to identify what is and is not contaminated. That's a whole nother issue because you've got to do sampling. So I appreciate the question, but if they have a bunch of liquid, if they have 10,000 gallons, then we're talking about a potentially, really a big, large scale disaster where, it's going to be hard to recover for a very, very long time. There's Some of y'all may have heard of the word it's a Superfund site or a brownfield site. We're kind of getting into that territory. If you ask me, if there's, on a large scale or a worst case scenario where there's a lot of volume of stuff flying around.
Correct.
Thank you for that, Brandon. And I think that that's going to be all the questions that we have time for on this call. But again, please go ahead and feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. We do plan to send this recording out to everybody who's registered at the link, along with some additional action items that people can take action and different ways for folks to plug into this movement. There are definitely, a lot of things happening and moving forward. And so again, I just want to say thank you everybody for joining the call tonight. Please, if you have additional questions, please direct those to the social media or the email. We will send this recording out. We do hope that people continue to stay abreast to this topic. And we do have ways for people to plug in and join our crew. So yes, just look up West Wind Resistance on social media. There are the links in the chat. Again, I just want to say a huge Wopila and Niawe to everybody who joined. Hope you have a great evening, and we look forward to joining together in this fight soon. Thanks, everybody.